Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom HaMishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Thursday? Yehud in South Carolina, Nancy in North Carolina, Guy in Ohio, Melissa in Great Neck, Bella in Florida, Shandor in the Bronx, Joe in the Inland Empire, Paul in the Great Northwest, Orient in Texas, Renee in Indiana, flying those LA colors. I like it, Renee. Sharon in New Jersey, Lucy in Minnesota, Belle gonna be with us on the replay, Aoife in Florida, Chaim in Florida, Marie in Freeport, Lester in Florida, Ella in Southern California, Alan in New York City, and Moishi in Brooklyn. Welcome, everybody. Get over here. Okay. Working our way through Tractate Zevachim, the 29th volume of the Talmud, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 here in chapter 4. Basic question we keep coming back to: is a particular rite, R-I-T-E, element of the sacrificial service and a particular offering, is it indispensable? So if it's indispensable, then, if you have the priest has the incorrect intention with respect to eating beyond, eating part of that offering or consuming it on the altar beyond its designated time, it could become disqualified as pigul, and then if somebody did eat of it, would be subject to kares, death at the hands of the heavenly court. But if it's not an indispensable rite, then pigul could not take hold. If it's not an indispensable rite with regard to the blood presentations, like pouring out the remainder on the base of the altar, then if he's already done the sprinklings, the person, the owner of the offering, has already achieved atonement or fulfilled his obligation. And if this additional step, which should be done, it's proper to do it. But if it was somehow not done, it would not disqualify the offering because the indispensable steps have already been accomplished. And as we see in this chapter, it's really that first sprinkling on the altar. If there's going to be 4 in the case of a sin offering, then according to Beis Hillel, the majority opinion, it's really that first sprinkling that needs to be done. After that, if the other 3 weren't done, the person has achieved atonement. Nevertheless, since those 3 sprinklings are part of the sprinkling, it might be that if the priest had the incorrect intention, pigul could take hold, even though really only that first sprinkling is indispensable. The other 3 aren't indispensable, and yet it's a little bit of a hybrid zone, unlike pouring out the base on the altar or burning the sacrificial portions, etc. Okay, continuing this discussion, we're about halfway down, maybe a little more, on page 39a. Today's a double daf, so we'll keep it moving. The Gemara returns to discuss the statement of Rav Papa that a garment sprayed by blood from the last 3 placements of the blood of a sin offering requires laundering. This only applies to blood that's splattered, sprayed onto the garment of the high priest in a sin offering, because the Torah says so, that his garment must be laundered. If it's any other kind of offering, this doesn't apply. And as we've seen, it's only the actual blood of the soul that is fit for sprinkling where this is going to happen. So the blood has to be, the animal has to be slaughtered, shechted. It's blood, the blood that spurts out that kills it, right? When it bleeds out, that's the blood of the soul. It has to be collected in a service vessel, and then that blood in the service vessel from that moment of collection until the sprinkling is done, if that splatters onto the priest's garment, it must be laundered. But prior to being collected in a service vessel at the time of shechting and after the final sprinkling, then if it gets on the priest's garment, he won't have to launder, right? That's the general principle. So about this, Rav Papa said, right, that garment sprayed by blood from the last 3 placements. Now we know that only the first placement is absolutely indispensable, and yet the last 3 are kind of connected to it. And that's why if the blood sprayed from those sprinklings onto the priest's garment, the laundering would still be required. And how does Rav Papa prove this? Well, this is regarding his proof from the Mishna that states that if the blood of a sin offering sprayed onto a garment from the corner of the altar or from the base of the altar, the garment does not require laundering. So Ravina says, in answer to the objection raised against Rav Papa above, that according to Rav Papa, the Mishnah on page 93a should be understood like this. The term from the corner means from the corner literally, after the blood was placed there, and therefore Rav Papa could infer from this that blood that is fit to be placed on the corner, including the blood to be used for the last 3 sprinklings, that would require laundering. But once it hits the corner, it's already achieved the atonement, but maybe not the 4th corner. Anything before the 4th corner might require the laundering. But pouring it out on the base, no, right then, even if it splatters from the base onto the priest's garment, the atonement was already achieved, and so the laundering won't be required. But the term from the base of the altar does not actually mean literally from the base. Rather, it means from the blood that is fit for the base of the altar, i.e. from the remainder of the blood, which is to be poured on the base. And Rav Tachlifa Bar Gaza said to Ravina, one can say a different explanation. That both this and that, i.e. the term from the corner and the term from the base, are referring to blood that is fit for the corner or the base. In which case, the Mishnah teaches that a garment sprayed by the blood that was to be used for the last 3 placements of a sin offering does not require laundering. Right? This would suggest that after the first sprinkling, which is truly the indispensable one, after that, we're not really going to consider them indispensable, and so therefore blood splattered on the garment, it won't require laundering. And this would be contrary to the opinion of Rav Papa. So Ravina replied, what is this claim? Now that you say that blood which is fit for the corner does not require laundering, is it necessary to state that the same applies to the blood that is merely fit for the base of the altar? That ruling would be unnecessary. Rather, it must be that the term from the corner means from the corner literally, i.e. that the blood has already been placed there, whereas the term from the base means from the blood that is fit for the base, i.e. from the remainder of the blood, which is to be poured on the base. Now the Mishnah teaches, with regard to all the offerings whose blood is to be placed on the inner altar. Which are the offerings whose blood is placed on the inner altar? Yom Kippur offerings. Only on Yom Kippur, right? Do we use the blood of the goat and the blood of the bull and bring it inside the sanctuary? And some of that blood is going to be sprinkled on the curtain between the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies. Some of it is going to be sprinkled between the staves of the Ark of the Covenant that's inside the Holy of Holies. And some of it is going to be sprinkled on the incense altar, which is in the sanctuary. But these internal sprinklings, right, meaning inside the sanctuary, including in the Holy of Holies, only applies to Yom Kippur. All other sprinklings of blood happen on the external altar, the outer altar that we use every day when the temple is standing, which is in the courtyard of the Holy Temple. So the Mishnah teaches, with regard to all the offerings whose blood is to be placed on the inner altar, which are the bull and the goat of Yom Kippur, the bull for an unwitting sin of the anointed priest, the bull for an unwitting communal sin, and the goat for an unwitting communal sin of idol worship, if the priest omitted even one of the placements, it is as though he did not facilitate atonement. So the sages taught in a Baraisa, the Torah first discusses the bull for an unwitting sin of the anointed priest, and afterward the bull for an unwitting communal sin, concerning which it states, and he shall do with the bull as he did with the bull for a sin offering, Leviticus 4:20. And it may be asked, this phrase, and he shall do as he did, what does this come to teach? All the details stated with regard to the first bull, i.e. that of the anointed priest, seem to be stated explicitly with regard to the second bull as well. So rather, the verse comes to repeat the law of the sprinkling of the blood as though it were written twice with regard to the same bull. And this repetition of the law indicates that the sprinkling is indispensable, thereby teaching that if the priest omitted one of the placements, he has done nothing. Now, I have a derivation only with regard to the 7 placements on the curtain separating between the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies, that they are indispensable, as these 7 are indispensable in all cases, as the Gemara will explain on page 40. From where is it derived that the same applies to the 4 placements on the inner altar, as opposed to on the curtain? So the verse states, so shall he do. Now the Baraisa continues, the verse states, and he shall do with the bull in Leviticus 4:20, and this alludes to a different bull whose service is similar, namely the bull of Yom Kippur. As he did with the bull, now on page 39b, this is a reference to the bull for an unwitting sin of the anointed priest, teaching that all of the sprinklings of the blood of this bull are also indispensable. A sin offering, these are the goats for an unwitting communal sin of idol worship, teaching that they are offered in the same manner as the bull for an unwitting communal sin, their blood being sprinkled in the sanctuary and their flesh burned. Now, one might have thought that I should include also the goats of the festivals and the goats sacrificed on the new moons, which are communal offerings as well, i.e. that their service should be performed inside the sanctuary like the bull for an unwitting communal sin. Therefore, the verse states, so shall he do with this, Leviticus 4:20, which indicates that this service is performed only with this animal and not with the goats of the festivals or the goats of the new moons. You know, I'm a little perturbed because we're talking about here, you know, as we learned in the previous tractate, about offerings that are brought for communal sin, communal error. Communal error, meaning that the Sanhedrin made an error, passed a law that then the majority of the population relied on. And so now the Sanhedrin has to bring this special offering. Or that the anointed priest, right, in this case the high priest, and they were only anointed before the first temple when we were in the tabernacle and during the first temple period. But near the end of the first temple period, the anointing oil compounded by Moses in the wilderness was stashed away. And thereafter, high priests assumed the role of high priest by being declared publicly and putting on the garments, the special garments of the high priest. There was no more anointing oil. But that's what we mean by anointed priest. And when an anointed priest makes an error on behalf of the community, there's a special offering brought for that. Here, it's indicating that those special offerings for a communal error of the high priest or of the Sanhedrin are brought inside the sanctuary. And I'm just wondering if that's where the law ended up, because we've read elsewhere that only Yom Kippur offerings are inside the sanctuary. And I checked on that today and found a source that said, right, only Yom Kippur is in the sanctuary, and even these communal error offerings the sprinkling is done on the external altar. So it may be that where we are, that's why you have to be careful, right? Because sometimes the Gemara is indicating something that didn't end up being the law. So just, put a pin in that, caution as we read on. Okay, so the Gemara asks, and what did you see to include these goats for the unwitting communal sin of idol worship, and to exclude those goats sacrificed on the festivals and the new moon? And the Gemara answers, after noting that the verse included some offerings and excluded others, one can say, I included these goats for an unwitting communal sin of idol worship, as they atone for the known transgression of a mitzvah, i.e. idol worship, and therefore they are similar to the bull for an unwitting communal sin, which is brought for an erroneous ruling of the Sanhedrin with regard to a specific mitzvah. And I exclude those goats sacrificed on the festivals and the new moons, as they do not atone for the known transgression of a mitzvah, but rather they atone for the unwitting defilement of the temple or its sacrificial foods. So the Baraisa resumes its interpretation of the verse. Quote, and the priest shall make atonement. This teaches that atonement is achieved even if the elders did not place their hands on the head of the bull, as they are commanded to do in Leviticus 4:15. And they shall be forgiven. This teaches that atonement is achieved even if the priest did not place the remainder of the blood on the base of the altar, as is required in Leviticus 4:7. Right? Again, zooming in on what is indispensable and what is not. Now the Gemara again asks, and as the verse does not specify which aspects of the service are included and which are excluded, what did you see to disqualify the offering in the case of the 7 sprinklings? How did you derive that the phrase, and he shall do as he did, teaches that the 7 sprinklings are indispensable? And what did you see to render the offering fit in the absence of placing the hands on the head of the offering and pouring out the remainder of the blood on the base of the altar, based on the words, and the priest shall make atonement and they shall be forgiven? Why are those things not considered indispensable and the 7 sprinklings are? So the Gemara answers, you should say the following logical argument. I disqualify the offering in the absence of the 7 sprinklings, as these 7 sprinklings are indispensable in all cases, as will be explained on page 40a, and I render the offering fit in the absence of placing hands on the head of the offering and in the absence of pouring of the remainder of the blood onto the base of the altar, as these are not indispensable in all cases, and therefore it is reasonable to conclude that they are not indispensable here either. Now we're on page 48. So now the Gemara analyzes this Baraisa in closer detail. The master said in the Baraisa, I have a derivation only with regard to the 7 placements on the curtain separating between the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies, that they are indispensable, as these 7 are indispensable in all cases. And the Gemara asks, where are the 7 indispensable? And Rav Papa says, in the case of the red heifer, and in the case of the purification process of one afflicted with tsuras. So the Baraisa continues, from where is it derived that the same applies to the 4 placements on the inner altar? And the verse states, so shall he do. And the Gemara asks, what is different about the 7 placements that they should be indispensable? If you say that the reason is that the 7 placements are written and repeated by means of the terms, and he shall do as he did, which teaches that they are indispensable, well, I could argue that the 4 placements as well are written and repeated. Why then should their law be any different, where we said that all 4 are not indispensable on the outer altar, only the first one is? So Rabbi Yirmiyah says, this is necessary only according to the minority opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who maintains that only 2 placements are written in this chapter, while the other 2 are derived through a juxtaposition. Consequently, a specific derivation is required for these, as it is taught in Baraisa with regard to the placements of the inner altar. Above, in the case of the bull for an unwitting sin of the anointed priest, the verse states corner in the plural form of the corners, i.e. it says corners, plural, where it could have written corner in the singular. So this implies 2 corners must be sprinkled. And below, with regard to the bull of the unwitting communal sin, it states corner in the plural form of corners. And together these amount to 4. This is the statement of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda says this derivation of Rabbi Shimon is not necessary, as it states in these same verses, and he shall put of the blood upon the corners of the altar, which is before the Lord, which is in the tent of meeting. And the superfluous expression in the tent of meeting teaches that the blood must be placed on all the corners of the altar that are stated with regard to the tent of meeting, i.e. on all 4 corners. And the Gemara asks in Rabbi Yehuda, what does he do with the phrase, so shall he do, which Rabbi Shimon interprets as referring to the 4 placements? And the Gemara answers that Rabbi Yehuda requires this verse for that which is taught in a Baraisa, as we did not learn with regard to the bull of Yom Kippur that placing hands is required, i.e. that the high priest must place his hands on this animal before it is slaughtered. And likewise, it is not stated that the remainder of its blood must be poured out on the base of the altar. From where is it derived that these actions must be performed? The verse states, so shall he do. So the Gemara asks, and did we not learn with regard to the bull of Yom Kippur that these requirements do apply? But you said earlier in the Baraisa with the bull in Leviticus 4:20 that this alludes to the bull of Yom Kippur, which indicates that all the rites performed in connection with the bull for an unwitting communal sin apply also to the bull of Yom Kippur. And the Gemara answers, the derivation from the phrase, so shall he do, was necessary. Why? Because it could enter your mind to say that this matter, the comparison between the bull for an unwitting communal sin and the bull of Yom Kippur, applies only to a service that is indispensable for atonement, for example, the sprinkling of the blood. But with regard to a service that is not indispensable for atonement, such as placing hands on the head of the animal or pouring out the remainder of the blood, one might say that these actions do not need to be performed. Therefore, the verse teaches us, so shall he do, i.e., these services too must be performed with the bull of Yom Kippur. And the Gemara asks, and Rabbi Shimon, what does he do with this phrase, in the tent of meeting, from which Rabbi Yehuda derives that the blood must be placed on all four corners of the altar? And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Shimon requires the phrase, in the tent of meeting, to teach that if the roof of the sanctuary was breached by a hole, the priest would not sprinkle the blood, as it would no longer be called the tent of meeting. And the Gemara asks, and the other Tana, Rabbi Yehuda, from where does he derive that law? And the Gemara explains that Rabbi Yehuda derives it from the superfluous term, which is in the tent of meeting. And the Gemara asks, okay, well then the other one, Rabbi Shimon, how does he interpret the phrase, which is? As he maintains that this expression is not significant enough maintains that this is not significant enough to interpret. So there, they've rejoined company, even though they diverted for a moment. So Abaye said, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda as well, it was necessary to learn from the phrase, so shall he do, that the four placements are indispensable, as it might enter your mind to say that just as it is with regard to placing hands and the remainder of the blood, that even though they are written and repeated, they are not indispensable. So too, the four placements of blood should not be indispensable. Therefore, the phrase, so shall he do, teaches us that this is not the case, and the four sprinklings are indeed indispensable. Now, the Baraisa teaches, with the bull, in Leviticus 4:20, and this alludes to the bull of Yom Kippur. So to what law does this statement relate? It serves to teach that all matters stated with regard to the bull of Yom Kippur are indispensable. And this is obvious, since the word statute is written concerning it. Quote, and this shall be an everlasting statute to you, Leviticus 16:29. And there is a principle that laws described as statutes are indispensable, right? That's why we've seen it, and we've said it before a few times, and that's why we see how carefully the high priest was trained prior to Yom Kippur, that his choreographed actions that he has to do that day are all exact. There's no improvising on Yom Kippur. He has to do everything in the exact order that that is laid out for the high priest to follow on Yom Kippur. All the sprinklings, all the slaughterings, all the collectings of the blood, all the changes of clothes, the immersions in the mikveh, the washings of hands and feet, everything is choreographed exactly, because if he makes a mistake with regard to any of it, if he omits any of it, then he will not have achieved an atonement on behalf of the nation, which is obviously a really big deal. So all of the actions, all of the sprinklings is what we're talking about here, with regard to the goats and the bull of Yom Kippur, must be done exactly right. So, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, this statement is necessary only according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says, when the term statute is written concerning the Yom Kippur service, indicating that no details may be altered, it is written only with regard to actions performed in white garments. Right? When is the high priest on Yom Kippur wearing white garments? Right? That means he's not wearing the 8 garments of a high priest, but only the white garments, which is the special outfit of a high priest that he only wears on Yom Kippur, where he removes the 4 distinguishing garments of a high priest. He's basically dressed like a regular priest. When does a high priest dress like a regular priest? I.e., when is he humble in that manner? By definition, by statute, as he's been ordered to do by the Torah, when he enters the Holy of Holies, right? When he enters the Holy of Holies, that's when he's dressed in the white garments. When the term statute is written concerning the Yom Kippur service, indicating that no details may be altered according to this view, it is written only with regard to actions performed in white garments inside the Holy of Holies, for example, burning the incense and sprinkling the blood inside the Holy of Holies, which are the essential services of the day, And it teaches that if the high priest performed one of the actions before another, i.e. not in the proper order, he has done nothing. But this would suggest that sprinklings that he did not in the Holy of Holies, but rather at the incense altar, which is in the sanctuary, but not in the Holy of Holies, there, if he made a little bit of a mistake, it wouldn't disqualify the entire Yom Kippur service. But with regard to those actions performed in white garments outside, meaning in the sanctuary, if he performed one action before another, what he did is done, and he's not required to repeat the rite, according to this view. Consequently, one might say that from the fact that their order is not indispensable, it may be derived that the sprinklings, i.e. the placements themselves, are also not indispensable. You might have thought that. Therefore, the term with the bull teaches us that the placements are indeed indispensable, the sprinklings on the inner altar, the incense altar. Now, Rav Papa objects to this whole analysis. And how can you say this? That Rabbi Yehuda derives from here that the placements are indispensable. But isn't it taught in the Baraisa? The verse discussing the Yom Kippur service states, and when he has finished atoning for the sanctuary. And this indicates that if he performed the atonement, i.e. sprinklings inside the sanctuary, he has finished the order of the service, even though he has not poured the remainder of the blood on the base of the altar. And if he did not perform the atonement, he has not finished. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Yehuda said to Rabbi Akiva, for what reason do we not say if he finished the entire service, which includes sprinkling the blood in the sanctuary and pouring the remainder of the blood onto the base of the altar, he has facilitated atonement? And if he did not finish, he has not facilitated atonement. Why do we not use that terminology? This indicates that Rabbi Yehuda derives from this verse the law that the sprinklings in the sanctuary are indispensable. And Rav Papa says, so this reference to the bull of Yom Kippur in the term with the bull is necessary only to apply to the bull of Yom Kippur three laws that are derived from that which is stated with regard to the bull for an unwitting sin of the anointed priest. Quote, and the priest shall immerse his finger in the blood, in Leviticus 4:6. These laws can be summarized in the shortened form, et blood, and with the immersion. Right? There's a little mnemonic to help us remember. And the Gemara elaborates with regard to the word et. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says, this word is necessary only to render fit service performed by a priest who has a wart or a blister on his finger. These are not considered an interposition between his finger and the blood. With regard to the term in the blood, in Leviticus 4:6, this teaches that the blood in the service vessel must be of a sufficient measure for immersion from the outset. The priest must initially collect in the vessel enough blood for all the sprinklings, rather than adding blood to the vessel for each sprinkling. And finally, the term, and the priest shall immerse his finger in the blood, indicates that there must be enough blood in the vessel such that the priest can immerse his finger in it and not have to wipe the sides of the utensil to collect blood for the sprinkling. So, why are we talking about this now? The Gemara explains, and it was necessary for the verse to state both these last two terms. It had to write in the blood, as had the merciful one written only, and the priest shall immerse. I would say that the sprinklings are valid even if there was not a sufficient measure of blood for immersion from the outset, but only enough for a single sprinkling, provided that the priest then added more blood to the vessel for each sprinkling. Therefore, the merciful one writes in the blood, to teach that from the outset there must be enough blood in the vessel for all the sprinklings. And conversely, had the merciful one written only in the blood, I would say that even if there was enough blood in the vessel at the outset, it is not necessary that there be enough blood for immersion for the last sprinklings, as the priest can wipe the sides of the utensil to collect blood for sprinkling. And that's why the merciful one writes, and the priest shall immerse. Now, the Gemara addresses another apparently superfluous phrase in the same chapter. Really what we're getting at, and we're going, sort of digression within digression within digression, but what we're getting at is, how do we know what's indispensable and what's not? Look at the language. It seems to indicate that something is indispensable, but then the counter argument would be, but that language is needed to teach a different law. If it's teaching a different law, how could it teach what we're looking for, that something is indispensable, right? So in one of these digressions. So the Gemara addresses another apparently superfluous phrase in the same chapter. And the priest shall put some of the blood upon the corners of the altar of sweet incense before the Lord. Why do I need the verse to mention the sweet incense? It would have been enough to identify the altar as being before the Lord, and we know it's the inner altar. So rather, this serves to teach that if the altar had not been inaugurated with sweet incense, the priest would not sprinkle blood on it. And the Gemara comments, it is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rav Papa that the superfluous phrase in the passage discussing the bull for an unwitting communal sin alludes to the bull of Yom Kippur in order to teach the three laws of et, in the blood, and immersion. And from the case of the bull for an unwitting sin of the anointed priest, which is also alluded to in that verse. And the Baraisa states, and he shall do with the bull as he did with the bull of the sin offering. So what is the meaning when the verse states with the bull? This serves to include the bull of Yom Kippur for all that is stated in this matter, i.e. in the passage concerning the bull of an unwitting sin of the anointed priest, specifically these laws of et, in the blood, and immersion. This is the statement of Rebbe. Rabbi Yishmael said, this inclusion is unnecessary, as these laws can be derived via a Kal V'chomer inference, like this. Just as in a case in which one offering is not equated with another offering of a different type of animal, and the Torah equated the actions of sprinkling the blood in one offering with the actions of the blood in another offering, as will be explained. In a case in which the Torah equated one offering with another offering, i.e. the bull of an unwitting sin of the anointed priest and the bull of Yom Kippur, isn't it logical that the Torah should equate the actions of sprinkling the blood in one offering with the actions of the blood in the other offering? In other words, if we're learning out about sprinklings from one kind of offering to another offering where the Torah didn't make a explicit link between those offerings, now that the Torah has made an explicit link between those offerings, all the more so we would borrow one element of the law across to the other offering because these are linked explicitly by the Torah. That's the Kal V'chomer. So therefore, the direct derivation by way of special inclusion is not necessary because we have this Kal V'chomer. So rather, what is the meaning when the verse states, and he shall do with the bull as he did with the bull for a sin offering? With regard to the first instance of with the bull, this is the bull for the unwitting communal sin. And with regard to the second instance of with the bull, this is the bull for an unwitting sin of the anointed priest. And the verse serves to teach that just as in the first case, if the priest omitted one of the sprinklings, he has done nothing, the same is true in the second case. Now the Gemara clarifies the Baraisa. The master said above, just as in a case in which one offering is not equated with another offering. And what is the meaning of the expression, one offering is not equated with another offering? Which offerings are not brought from the same type of animal, but nevertheless the laws governing the sprinkling of their blood are the same. If we say that Rabbi Yishmael is referring to the bull of Yom Kippur and the goat of Yom Kippur, and from them he derives, by way of a Kal V'chomer inference, that the actions concerning the bull of Yom Kippur are the same as those of the bull of an unwitting sin of an anointed priest, which are the same animal, well, we could refute this. What is notable about these offerings, the bull and the goat of Yom Kippur? They are notable in that their blood enters the innermost sanctum, meaning the Holy of Holies. That never happens, even if we say that the blood of a bull of a communal offering might be sprinkled on the inner altar. It certainly isn't reaching the Holy of Holies. Rather say that the reference here is to the bull of an unwitting communal sin and the goats for an unwitting communal sin of idol worship. But once again, we could refute this. What is notable about these offerings? They are notable in that they both atone for the transgression of a known mitzvah, whereas the bull of Yom Kippur atones for unknown transgressions. Right? The bull of Yom Kippur, first of all, it's an atonement for the priests. Not the bull of Yom Kippur is not for the nation. That's the goat. The goat of Yom Kippur atones for the nation. The bull of Yom Kippur atones for the high priest, his family, and I believe also his brethren, meaning all the other priests, and errors that they might have made and didn't even know about. Not necessarily known transgressions, right? If you bring a bull for the error of the Sanhedrin that caused the nation to lead to commit a sin because they relied on this erroneous ruling, okay, well, we know what happened. Whereas the goats and the bulls of Yom Kippur are also atoning for sins that the people didn't even know they did. Rather, the inference here is to the bull for an unwitting communal sin and the goat of Yom Kippur, and this is what Rabbi Yishmael is saying. Just as in a case in which one offering is not equated with another offering, as this is a bull and that is a goat, And nevertheless, the actions of sprinkling the blood in one offering are equated with the actions of the blood of the other offering with regard to that which is written concerning it. In a case in which one offering is equated with another offering, i.e. the bull of an unwitting sin of an anointed priest and the bull of Yom Kippur, as this is a bull and that is a bull, isn't it logical that the actions of sprinkling the blood in one offering are equated with the actions of the blood in the other offering? Now, does that mean that they're sprinkled in the same way? Or are we simply equating them to say they're both indispensable? The blood of the goat of Yom Kippur is sprinkled even inside the Holy of Holies, and this is not so concerning the blood of the bull. Nevertheless, with regard to the sprinkling in the sanctuary, which is common to both, their actions are performed in the same manner, with the blood being sprinkled with a finger on the curtain and on the corners of the altar, which altar? The inner altar. And by means of this Kal V'chomer inference, the case of the bull of Yom Kippur is derived from the case of the bull of an unwitting sin of an anointed priest, with regard to the laws summarized by those three words, et, in the blood, and immersion, as they are both bulls, right? There's simply the technical aspects of how much blood has to be in the vessel when the priest is going to sprinkle with his finger. And likewise, in the case of the goat of Yom Kippur, the case of the goat of Yom Kippur is derived from the case of the goats for an unwitting communal sin of idol worship with regard to the laws of et, in the blood, and immersion via this Kal V'chomer inference, as they are both goats. Okay, so we're learning out how much blood has to be in the vessel. And we'll extend that from these unwitting sin goats and bulls to the Yom Kippur goats and bulls. Now the Gemara asks, how can the laws of the goat of Yom Kippur be derived from the goats of an unwitting communal sin of idol worship? But does a matter derived by juxtaposition, i.e. a law that is not written explicitly in the Torah, but that is learned by means of a comparison, come and again teach a Kal V'chomer inference? Right? We only learn a Kal V'chomer from something that's explicitly written. We're not going to learn a Kal V'chomer from something that already had to be derived before it became a law. And there is a principle that a law derived by juxtaposition with regard to consecrated matters cannot subsequently teach another law via a Kal V'chomer. The laws alluded to by the words et, in the blood, and immersion are not explicitly stated with regard to the goats of an unwitting communal sin of idol worship. Rather, they are derived from the comparison found in the verse, and he shall do as he did, which alludes to the goats for an unwitting communal sin of idol worship and the bull for an unwitting sin of an anointed priest. So Rav Papa said, the school of Rabbi Yishmael maintains that a matter derived by juxtaposition is available to yet again teach a Kal V'chomer. But that's a minority view. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. We actually are on page 41a already. We moved fast today. I'm almost done. Get those questions in. The Gemara continues to analyze the statement of Rabbi Yishmael in the Baraisa with the bull. This is the bull for an unwitting communal sin. The Gemara asks, why is it necessary to derive this case by way of an exposition? This verse itself is written in reference to the bull for an unwitting communal sin. And Rav Papa said the derivation is necessary because Rabbi Yishmael wants the case of the bull for an unwitting communal sin to teach with regard to the burning on the altar of the sacrificial portions, including the diaphragm and the two kidneys, that this obligation applies also to the goats for an unwitting communal sin of idol worship, despite the fact that this requirement is not stated with regard to them. Again, we keep having to ask, with regard to a particular kind of offering where the Torah did not say all the elements of that sacrificial service, where are we going to borrow from to learn what we do with the unstated portions of that service? Are we going to look to a similar type of offering but from a different animal? Or to a similar animal but from a different kind of offering? Are we going to look from a communal offering to an individual offering? Are we going to look from an offering for an error that the high priest made to learn out about the offering of an unwitting communal offering based on a ruling of the Sanhedrin? What enables us, what justifies us in borrowing from one area of the law to answer an unanswered question versus another area of the law? Right? None of us are memorizing all these rulings, but we're just trying to understand what it is that we're doing at each step of the journey as we read along. So Rav Papa continues, and as the obligation to burn the diaphragm and the 2 kidneys on the altar is not written with regard to the bull for an unwitting communal sin itself, but rather it is derived by juxtaposition from the bull of the unwitting sin of the anointed priest, in which this requirement is explicitly stated, it was necessary to include the bull for an unwitting communal sin once again with the term with the bull. And finally, the Gemara elaborates, this derivation is required in order that it should be as though this law of burning the diaphragm and the 2 kidneys was written with regard to the bull for an unwitting communal sin itself. And in this manner, the derivation from this case, teaching the law in the case of the goats for an unwitting communal sin of idol worship, should not be a matter derived by juxtaposition that again teaches by juxtaposition, as such a derivation is not done with regard to consecrated matters. That's where we'll stop. I think there's only one question. Sharon, if the garment is not laundered, what is the implication? That the garment remains bloody, or it is discarded and a new garment is acquired? Great question. I was wondering that myself. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I'm wondering, first of all, in ancient times, did they have laundering procedures that would take blood out of a white garment? That's hard to do today, right? With all the chemicals, etc., that we have. Maybe you guys know some tricks, but maybe I don't know anything. But it's hard to get blood stains out, right? And I think that if it's a stained garment, it's going to be disqualified from being used by a priest in the temple. And if it's disqualified, but it was used for sacred matters, I think we learn elsewhere that, they had like special procedures, what they would do with it. I think they could, cut it up. They could, use certain portions for other things. They have to be very careful not to make personal use of such garments because that would be me'ilah, right? A prohibition on personal use of consecrated items. So maybe they needed to be buried. But I suspect that, if the laundering wasn't required, if they could launder it and then clean it well enough so that it could be used, they probably did that. But I think the interesting case is where they didn't have the ability to clean it so well that it could be reused. So even though they weren't going to be able to reuse it again, since the Torah said it must be laundered, they'll do the laundering, right? And then that becomes a mitzvah in itself to do the laundering of a garment, where even perhaps the laundering won't be successful in rendering the garment clean enough to be used again. Nevertheless, you have to do the laundering. That's the way I'm understanding this. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. Have a good night.